Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Rudolf Steiner. This is Building Stones for an Understanding of the Mystery of Golgotha, Lecture 7. We are reading along and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everybody, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I make the statements that I do. A particular note again today almost certainly will be the unconventional Bible study. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the building stones for an understanding of the mystery of Golgotha, Lecture 7, April 19th, 1917. One of the outstanding figures in world history is Julian the Apostate, a successor of Constantine, who fell by the hand of an assassin in the campaign against the Persians in the year AD 363. That's going to be note 1. Let's go ahead and see that. Julian had received a strict Christian education. During his internment in Cappadocia, he began to doubt the validity of Christianity, and when sent to Athens in 354, the intellectual center of Greece, he secretly abandoned Christian beliefs. His treatise against the Galileans, referred to here, summarizes his polemical arguments against Christianity. Briefly, they are as follows. Knowledge of God is natural demand. It does not come by teaching. That is true. The story of Eden in the Old Testament is a fable, and the account of creation is inferior to that of Plato. Also true. The idea of a jealous God and a chosen people is unacceptable. Also true. The Mosaic law is barbarous. Also true. The Decalogue, common to all nations. That is true too. No man is better for reading the Jewish scriptures. The New Testament is full of inconsistencies. Matthew and Luke disagree on the genealogy of Jesus. Peter and Paul were hypocrites. Matthew 4:5 is illogical, and in Luke 22:42-47, since the disciples were asleep, who could have told him the story of the angel? The Christians were fanatics and cheerfully massacred heretics. By contrast, the Greeks were mild and forbearing. They were superior in wisdom and intelligence. Christianity has achieved little or nothing in the fields of science, astronomy, arithmetic, and music. The achievements of Plato, Socrates, Aristides, Thales, Lycurgus, Agesilaus, and Archidemus, the Sibyls, the Delphic Oracle, and the pagan mysteries surpassed anything that Christianity had to offer. I don't know that I would go quite that far, but because of history and the scope and the amount of people involved. But in general, yeah. And the pagan mysteries surrounded anything that Christianity had to offer. Like the formal refutation of Julian's treatise was Pro-Christian Religione, composed between AD 429 and 441 by Cyril, Bishop of Alexandria. So, I don't disagree with pretty much any of this. This is amazing that, this is 2024, so 1700 years ago, there was somebody else who came to the exact same conclusions that I have merely from reading the book. And if you don't understand anything that I just said, there is a Bible study linked up here. It's 161 videos that documents me discovering that. Julian occupies a special place in the history of the West. His life and career showed how the course of world history is determined by the clash of contending forces. I pointed out in my previous lecture that in Constantine, we have a personality who had to abandon the former coercive measures practiced by the majority of the earlier emperors when they sought initiation into the mysteries. To compensate for this, he therefore did everything in his power to advance the cause of exoteric Christianity in the empire. Now, from earliest childhood, Julian was held in low esteem by the imperial family and their adherents. In the age with which we are dealing, it was the custom to anticipate the future of an individual, such as Julian, by resorting to prenatal prophecies. The imperial family had been obliged to conclude from the predictions of the Sibylline oracles that Julian would actively oppose the policy pursued by the Emperor Constantine. From the first, therefore, they tried to prevent Julian from being raised to the purple. It was decided that he should be murdered while still a child, and preparations were made to have him butchered, along with his brother. There was a strange aura attaching to Julian which inspired terror in those around him, and countless stories relating to his personality testify to the fact that there was something uncanny about him. On one occasion, during his campaign in Gaul, a somnambulist cried out as the army passed by, "There is the man who will restore the old gods and their images." The appearance of Julian at this moment in history must be seen as something predestined, something deeply significant. As often happens in such cases, his life was spared lest his murder should bring greater disaster in its train. People persuaded themselves that whatever steps he might take against the policy of Constantine could quickly be nullified, and precautionary measures were taken to neutralize the dangerous tendencies of Julian's makeup and his leanings towards paganism. In the first place, it was decided to give him a sound Christian education, which accorded with the ideas of Constantine. It was wasted effort and met with no response. Anything which had survived from the ancient Hellenic traditions fascinated him. Where powerful forces are at work in such a personality, they ultimately prevail. And so, because his mentors sought to protect him from dangerous associations, he was driven into the arms of Hellenic tutors and was introduced to Hellenic culture and civilization. When he grew older, Julian learned how the Neoplatonic philosophers were imbued with the spirit of Hellenism, and in consequence, he was finally initiated into the mysteries of Eleusis. Thus, at a time when the Roman emperors had already dispensed with the principle of initiation, an initiation in the person of Julian once again sat on the throne of the Caesars. Everything that Julian undertook must be judged in the light of his initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries, and history has been at great pains to misrepresent his actions in every possible way. In order to form a true estimate of such a personality as Julian, we must give due weight to the effects of this initiation. What spiritual benefit had Julian derived from his initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries? Through direct spiritual perception, he learned the secrets of cosmic and world evolution, the spiritual origin of the world, and how spiritual forces operate in the planetary and solar systems. This right here is remarkably similar to my personal experience, right? When I talk about the revelation experience that I had, it was this. I was taken out of my body and given a guided tour of the universe. I saw these things happen. I saw the unfolding of everything, the moving out of everything, and how everything affects each other. Right? That is where I learned of the oneness. It is where I lost racism. It is where I understood that all people were created by God, and therefore there was no chosen people of God. That's a big step for some people, right? You have grown up learning your entire life that this one particular group is the chosen ones, and therefore the atrocities that they committed in the possession of their land is something that is excusable. Well, obviously there was some genetic defect that made this have to happen right now. I believe that there were giants in the land. I believe that there were peoples who were doing things, right? And I used to apologize for the invasion of the Israelis. But after the Bible study, I couldn't do that anymore, right? I went through and we talked about that in no uncertain terms, right? There was 600,000 fighting men, which means that there was probably close to 3 million Israelis. Now, a 600,000 fighting men army is a lot of people. There is not many that can resist that, right? If an army of 600,000 people showed up on the shores of America, we would be hard-pressed to deal with that outside of nuclear options. That is an astounding number of people to have in a fighting force. And there are inconsistencies in the fact that they went through the desert with 3 million people plus animals, right? That is almost impossible, I'm just going to say. But there are reasons to believe that most of what was said in Exodus was patently untrue. And so it is almost certain that they did not wander in the desert for 40 years. They instead went and killed people, took over their land, and then went back and killed the people who helped them. There was no chosen people. And this experience, right, the direct spiritual perception, where I learned the secrets of the cosmic and world evolution and the spiritual origin of the world and how spiritual forces operate, that, for me, led to the Bible study and the discovery that we made together that it was mostly untrue. He learned to understand certain things which were incomprehensible to his contemporaries, with the exception of a few Greek initiates, namely the relation of solar influences and the being of the sun to the old Hermes logos. He understood the meaning of the Pythagorean maxim, "Thou shalt not speak against the sun." This does not refer, of course, to the physical sun, but to the spirit which is concealed behind the sun. Here's where it's going to get wild. I got a feeling it's coming. He knew that the ancient sacred traditions ascribed the origin of the world to the spiritual being of the sun, and above all, that man must recover his relation to the spiritual sun if he is to penetrate the source of his existence. Julian, therefore, was aware of the ancient sun mystery. He realized that the physical sun is but the external form of a spiritual sun, which can be awakened in the soul of man through initiation. When awakened, can reveal to him the intimate connection between the universe and the historical life of man on earth. That is in part true. It was clear that the spiritual sun is not the same as the sun that we see rise in the east every morning, right? It is a different light source. It is something ethereal. It is something spiritual. And it can appear to you in the opposite direction of the sun, right? When I do my meditations on the daily, I go out, and we're getting to winter, so it's about to come to a halt. I can't deal with the cold. It's just part of what's going on. But I go out there and I sit with my bare feet on the ground and my back to the sun. And the light, the sun, which appears, comes to me from the front. Right? My back is directly to the sun so that it is not blaring in my eyes. And yet I have the sun come to me. This spiritual sun comes to me from the opposite direction of the physical sun. It is not the same thing. It is not even related. And it's understandable, right? It is understandable that you would associate the light that appears with the sun because both of them are similar in appearance. When the light that appears comes to you, it is an overwhelming force that you have a very hard time dealing with. Your eyes are like, what is going on? Why are you looking at this? Until you get to the point where you can turn the light around, where you can do the things with the light. And that takes work. It takes dedication. And many people are scared off by the powerfulness of this light. It resembles the sun, but it is not related to the sun. They are two separate instances of light. It was clear to Julian that the world can never be ordered on a basis of rationalism, that only those who are able to be in touch with the sun logos are in any way fitted to have a voice in the ordering of the world. He had to recognize that the movements of the celestial bodies and the great historical movements of mankind are governed by a common law. Even a church father such as St. Chrysostom was aware of the existence of an ancient sun mystery, since he went so far as to declare that men are dazzled by the physical sun, that they cannot penetrate to the spiritual sun. The soul of St. Chrysostom was still illumined by a ray of wisdom from olden times.
But in those around him, hardly a trace of it remained. It was clear that scarcely a vestige of understanding remained for that method of awakening the soul to the secrets of the universe, which had been communicated through the ancient mysteries and which were certainly communicated to Julian, who was one of the last to be instructed in that method. He was therefore surrounded entirely by adherents of Constantine, by those who echoed the thoughts of Constantine. It is true that in the West, up to the end of the 9th century, we find outstanding personalities, even amongst the popes, who were still inspired by the ancient mystery wisdom. But the real opposition came from Rome, which set out to nullify the efforts of these individuals to pursue in its place a definite policy of its own towards the traditions of the ancient mysteries. I shall say a few words about this later. In effect, Julian only came in contact with a very exoteric form of Christianity. That is because Christianity has been separated from spiritual matters in large degree by the church. That is what is being described right here. Through complicated psychological processes, which are difficult to describe in detail, he lighted upon the idea of utilizing the last surviving remnants of initiation in order to ensure continuity in evolution. In reality, he was not an opponent of Christianity. He simply favored the continuity of Hellenism. Then he was an opponent of Christianity. He was more interested in promoting Hellenism than in opposing Christianity. That's because there is more to be gained from focusing on what you want than on what you don't want. Right? We talk about that here a lot, right? If you want something in your life, you focus on that. And if you don't want something in your life and you focus on that, that is exactly what you are going to pull into your life. It is part of the law of response. It is part of the law of opposites. It is intrinsically tied into the 8 laws of creation. With passionate enthusiasm, he strove to arrest the decline of Hellenism and to transmit its traditions to posterity, which is in direct opposition of Christianity. This guy is apologizing for Christianity, and he is using someone directly opposed to that to do it, and that is wild. He was opposed to any sudden break in continuity, any radical change. As an initiate of Eleusis, he knew that the policies he proposed to embark upon could not be realized unless one was in close touch with the spiritual forces operating in the sensible world, and that if we seek to introduce new impulses into world evolution by appealing to physical and psychic forces alone, then we are speaking against the sun in the Pythagorean sense. Julian had no such intention. Indeed, his purpose was quite the reverse. In effect, he accepted one of the greatest challenges that it is possible to imagine. Now, we must not forget that in Rome, at that time, and throughout the whole of southern Europe, there was an active opposition to this challenge. Remember that up until the time of Constantine, in large sections of the population, the last remnants of ancient cults had been preserved. Today, the question of miracles is a real thorn in the side about biblical exegesis, because people refuse to read the Gospels from the standpoint of the age to which the Gospels belong. The question of miracles raised no problems for the contemporaries of the evangelist, for they were aware of the existence of rites and ceremonies from which men derived spiritual forces which they were able to control. And this right here is a damnation of Christianity, right? Christianity has not been an entirely negative force, right? There have been structures built upon that have been good things. But there is a belief among the adherents that without Christianity there would be no morality, that without Christianity there would be no growth, that without Christianity there would be no. And that's just simply not true. We had morality prior to Christianity. We had morality prior to Judaism. We have growth. We have scientific endeavors. We have spiritual fruits that are separate of Christianity. And the fact that there is not a single Christian sect, not a single one that is actually healing anyone, is a damnation to their belief. They were directly called to be healers, right? That was part of the Gospels. Go forth and do these things. That is what you were supposed to do. And the fact is that we have given away those powers and say that they are only possible through the intervention of this guy who died 2,000 years ago. And that's just simply not true. I say that it is simply not true in case you were just running across this video for the first time, because I have healed myself. It is through the use of the powers of the Lord God Almighty, don't get it twisted. But I have manipulated the energies to the correct place. I have effected change within my own body and to a small measure outside of it. But within myself, I have healed myself. Healer, heal thyself. Okay, I did that. Next, right? I'm at the point now where I'm like, put me in, coach. I am getting better at the manipulations of the energies. And I'm like, all right, let's see if we can do something external. I'm unsure about how to go about that, right? Because there are many implications to that, but I'm ready to begin trying. I want to be the evidence that there is something different. That is literally what I ask for. I am here to tell you there is something different, but I can't give you my experience. I can only relay it, and I'm not here to convince you. I tell the story repeatedly because not everybody watches all of the videos. But I have removed a cyst from my throat. I have healed my shoulder through the direct manipulation of the electromagnetic forces of creation. I have done something that other people haven't. And so I am here to tell you how to do the same thing for you. That is what the Infinite Integrations playlist is about. Whilst, on the one hand, Christianity was introduced as a political measure which culminated in Constantine's edict of toleration, so attempts were made, on the other hand, to suppress the ancient pagan rites by assimilating them. Endless laws were promulgated by Rome which forbade the celebration of rites which derived their power from the spiritual world. These laws, it is true, declared that the old superstitions must cease, that no one may practice ritual magic in order to injure others, and no one may communicate with the dead, and so on. But these were only pretexts. The real purpose of these laws was to eradicate, root and branch, any traces of pagan cults which had survived from ancient times. Wherever possible, history has endeavored to hush up or conceal the real facts of the situation. This is the rollout of the control system, right? I refer often to the control system. All of these religions are control systems. All of the governments are control systems. And Christianity was a control system that was apparently directly devoted to removing spirituality from you and giving it away to some alternate source. But our earliest historical records were the work of priests and monks in the monasteries, a fact which modern science, which claims to be objective and to accept nothing on authority, studiously ignores. No, right? No, they don't ignore that. They cite the source. But just because you believe something and record something does not mean that the thing you were recording is because of your belief. And if you inject your belief into places that it doesn't belong, then that part is rightly left out. Like, nobody denies that there were monks writing down history. The argument is that they were changing history in order to make it seem like it was due to something that they believed, much like we have seen in these lectures. The avowed object of the monasteries, an example, priests and monks, was to suppress all knowledge of the true character of antiquity and to prevent the essential teachings of the pagan mysteries from being transmitted to posterity. And so, Julian saw the vanishing world of antiquity in a totally different light from the forerunners of Constantine. Through his initiation, he knew that the human soul was related to the spiritual world. He could only hope to succeed in the task he had undertaken, to use the forces of the old principle of initiation in order to further the continuity of human evolution, by resisting the current attitude to man's evolution. Because of his initiation, Julian was, in reality, a man with a profound and sincere love of truth, a sense for truth that was totally foreign to Constantine. Indeed, Julian's profound respect for truth has not its like in the history of the West. With his deep instinct for truth that had been fortified by his initiation, he turned his attention to teachings of the universities and schools of the day. He found that the Christian dogma had been introduced into the schools in the form that had existed since the time of Constantine. Armed with this dogma, the teachers gave their personal interpretations of the Hellenistic writers, whose works were centered around the figures of Zeus, Apollo, Pallas, Athene, Aphrodite, Hermes, Mercury, and so on. And Julian said to himself, "These teachers are the most outrageous sophists. How can they presume to expound ancient writings whose authors were convinced that the old gods were still living forces in the world? On what grounds do these teachers presume to interpret these writings when, by the very nature of their dogmas, they must deny the existence of these gods?" Julian's instinct for truth was outraged. He therefore forbade those who, by virtue of their Christian dogma, were unable to believe in the old gods, to expound the ancient writings in the schools. If today we had the same honesty of purpose as Julian, you can well imagine how much would be excluded from the curricula of our schools. We do. Right? We have... I said that wrong. We have the opposite happening, right? We have the exclusion happening of the Christian dogma, whereas in the time of Julian, it was the rolling out of the dogma that would separate people from spirituality.
That was literally their point. That was what they were trying to do, was to separate you from the workings of the Spirit. And today, it is the same thing happening, but in a different way, right?
They were saying back then, well, that can't be true because of Christ. And now they're saying that can be true because of science. And those two things are doing the same thing. They're just using different methods to get there. Julian wished to meet the challenge of the current trend with Julian wished to meet the challenge of the current trends, which nonetheless were a necessity from another point of view. In the first place, he had come to terms with the Gospels, which had arisen in a totally different way from the knowledge imparted to him in the Eleusinian mysteries. He could not reconcile himself to the way in which the Gospels had arisen. He said to himself, if that which is manifested in the Christ is a genuine inspiration that stems from the mysteries, then it must be possible to find it in the mysteries, for it must have been incorporated in the mystery teachings. He wanted to ascertain if it were possible to continue the ancient mystery teachings. In the first place, he was only familiar with the Christianity of his time in its exoteric aspect. He decided to make an experiment, not the kind of experiment that relies purely on human expedience. That would have seemed childish to him, but to undertake an experiment that had spiritual significance. He reasoned as follows. It has been prophesied that the temple in Jerusalem would be destroyed. Not a single stone would remain standing. This has indeed come to pass. No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. There are stones still standing. At least if you accept that the temple was located where it is commonly accepted to have existed. Right? The Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is the demonstration that that did not happen. Now, there is an alternative line of thinking that the temple was not on Temple Mount, that it was located a distance away with running water available and some of the requirements for the temple actually being there. It is entirely possible that that is true, and if that is true, then yes, all of the stones would be moved. But if not, if we take that the temple was on Temple Mount, then no, the Wailing Wall proves that to be false. That is a problem for some people. It's not for me, but it is for some people. But if this prophecy could be discredited, if its fulfillment could be prevented, then the mission of Christianity could not be accomplished. At the cost of great capital outlay, Julian decided therefore to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. A large number of workmen was assembled to begin the reconstruction. Now the whole affair must be regarded from a spiritual standpoint. It was not men alone, but gods, who Julian set out to challenge. And it is an undoubted fact that can be demonstrated historically, insofar as historical facts can be demonstrated, even externally, although internal evidence leaves no doubt of their truth, that each of the workmen engaged on the work of reconstruction had a vision. He saw tongues of flame licking over the place where he was working and was obliged to withdraw. I do not believe that at all. The undertaking was abandoned, but we recognize the high purpose that inspired Julian to undertake this venture. It was not necessary. As I have just stated, there are still stones together. Julian's experiment miscarried. After he had failed to discredit the prophecy of the destruction of the temple, he decided to approach the problem from another angle. His new plan was no less boldly conceived. The time had not yet come when the evolution of Europe had been influenced by that spiritual current, which owed its origin to the fact that one of the greatest church fathers, Augustine, note 2, we're going to go ahead and pop that out. Note 2, Manichaeanism and Augustine. Augustine, AD 345 to 410, an African by birth, was Manichaean for years. He became dissatisfied with Manichaeism, and when Faustus, the leader of the sect, failed to resolve his doubts, he abandoned Manichaean teachings. See Confessions, books 4 and 5. Augustine repaired to Rome, where he was converted by St. Ambrose in AD 386. His chief works were directed against the Manichaeans, e.g., books against the Manichaeans and on the utility of believing. The scriptures were a means to faith and hope, and the canon was the testimony of Christianity in the church. His dictum, better a man's body be destroyed than his soul, leads to the Inquisition. When Christianity became the state religion, he distinguished between civitas Dei, which was perfect and in which all men were equal in the sight of God, and civitas terrena, which of necessity was imperfect. It was the devil's domain, where sinful men had to submit to the authorities. Augustine was the founder of Western monasticism and monastic spirituality, and he exercised considerable influence on Pascal, Fenelon, and Port Royal. On Manichaeism in general, see F.C. Burkitt, Religion of the Manichees, 1925, and H.C. Puech, Le Manichaisme son fatador la sa doctrine, 1949. Augustine could not rise to a certain idea because at that time he lacked the necessary spiritual development. You know, perhaps, from your study of history, and I have referred to this on frequent occasions when discussing the Faust legend, that Augustine had originally been a Manichaean. Manichaeism originated in Persia and claimed to understand Christ Jesus better than Rome and Constantinople. This doctrine, unfortunately, is not yet permissible today to unveil the ultimate secrets of this doctrine, even in our present circle. Filtered through into Europe in later times in various guises and still survived, though in a corrupt form, in its ramifications in the 16th century when the Faust legend was first recorded. By a happy intuition, the revival of the Faust legend by Goethe preserved something of the spirit of Manichaeism. Julian thought on the grand scale. His thought embraced all mankind. In the presence of a man such as Julian, we realize only too clearly how limited are the thoughts of ordinary mortals. The doctrine of the Son of Man will, of necessity, assume different forms according to our capacity to form conceptions of the real nature of man himself. Our conceptions of the Son of Man must, therefore, depend upon our conceptions of man. The one involves the other. In this respect, men differ widely. At the present time, people have only the most superficial understanding of such matters. In Sanskrit, the word for man is manushya. The word expressed the basic feeling which a large number of people associate with the idea of humanity. Did y'all just see my power flash? I'm hoping that it didn't mess up my recording. We're going to see. When we use this vocable to describe man, we are referring to the spiritual aspect of man. We are appraising man primarily as a spiritual being. If we wish to express the idea that man is spirit, and his physical aspect is only the manifestation of spirit, then we use the word minutia. From our earlier discussions, you know that we can study man from another angle. Okay, it didn't. We can consider him mainly from his psychic aspect. We shall then give more attention to man as a soul than to man as spirit. His physical aspect and everything that is related to his external aspect will be of secondary importance. We shall then be able to characterize man from the information derived from his inner life, which is reflected in the eye, or in the fact that he holds his head erect. If you look into the derivation of the Greek word anthropos, you will find that it gives a rough indication of this aspect. Those who characterize man with the word minutia, or some similar vocable, see him primarily as spirit, as that which descends from the spiritual world. Those who characterize man with a word resembling the Greek word anthropos, and this applies especially to the Greeks themselves, are expressing his soul nature. Now, there is a third possibility. We can concentrate on the external, the corporeal or somatic aspect, which is the product of physical inheritance. We shall then characterize man with the word homo, that signifies approximately the procreator or the procreated. Here are three conceptions of man. Julian, who was aware of this trichotomy, felt the need to look for spiritual interpretation of the Son of Man. The thought occurred to him, I have already been initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. Perhaps it is possible to have myself initiated into the Persian mysteries, and into the mysteries which are in accordance with the doctrine of the Manichaeans. By this means, perhaps, I may be able to achieve my aim, the continuity of the pagan mysteries. This was momentous thought. Just as Alexander's campaign had deeper motives than the mere conquest of Asia, so Julian's expedition had other motives than the conquest of Persia. He wished to find out whether he could further his objective with the help of the Persian mysteries. In order to understand the problem that faced Julian, we must ask, what was it that Augustine could not understand in Manichaeism? I have already said that the time had not yet come to reveal the ultimate secrets of Manichaeism, but it is possible to give a few indications. In his youth, Augustine was deeply attached to these teachings, and they made a profound impression on him. He later exchanged the teachings of Manichaeism for Roman Catholicism. What did he not understand in Manichaeism? Why did he reject it? And what was beyond his comprehension in Manichaeism? The Manichaeans did not cultivate abstract ideas, which divorced the world of thought from the world of reality. The Manichaeans and the initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries were alike incapable of abstract thinking. Really? In earlier lectures, I attempted to show the difference between logical concepts and concepts in conformity with reality. The basic principle of Manichaeism was to cultivate only those ideas which are consistent with reality. Not that unreal ideas do not play a part in life. Unfortunately, they play a large part in life, especially at the present day, and the part they play is disastrous. And so, amongst other things, it was consistent with Manichaeism to form representations that were not purely abstract, but which were sufficiently powerful to intervene in the external world and to play an active part in that world. The conception of Christ Jesus that was commonly held by people at that time would have been quite impossible for the Manichaeans. And what was this conception? They had a somewhat nebulous idea of the Christ who had been incarnated in Jesus, through whom a change had been brought about in earth evolution. Ideas about Christ had become incredibly vague, especially in the 19th century. I'm going to hit on something that I didn't even consider yesterday in the videos. It was brought to light by one of the crew. I was talking about baptism and how being dunked in the water is not going to do anything to change your aura, right? It's not going to shake loose anything in the spiritual manner other than what you go into with the preconceived notions and splashing in the face, and they're going to do the same thing. I went into that with my own preconceived notions that the way that we do baptisms today is the way that it's always been done. And it was brought to my attention that that may not exactly be the case. There very well could be the possibility that baptism meant holding you down until you almost died, right? You were held underwater until you reached the point of the forced spiritual evolution, right? You were so thankful to come up that it did indeed shake your aura a little bit loose. And the more I thought about it, the worse that conception got to be, right? The more that I think about holding someone under until they almost drown in order to force a spiritual conception is pretty terrible, right? That is a fear-based conversion in the nth degree. And if that's what happened to Jesus, and this spirit came down, he might have killed him. He might have been possessed by whatever it was that came down, and that is a very real possibility. I understand that that's a little bit much for some people, and it's probably stepped on a whole bunch of toes, and I don't apologize for that. This is speculation. I'm not saying that this is what happened, but it could be. I believe in entities. I believe in disincorporated spirits. I believe that there are spirits that don't have a body and that are desperately searching for one. And so it is entirely possible that there was a possession that happened, right? And so when it says the nebulous idea of the Christ who had incarnated in Jesus, that could have been a later incarnation, right? It could have been a possession. I don't necessarily believe that it was, but it is definitely something that you need to keep in mind. And if they were indeed almost drowning people, that is pretty terrible. If we are really honest and sincere, we cannot say that the notions afforded by Christian dogma about Christ and his mission will take us very far. If Christian ideas are not powerful enough to envisage on earth, which is not the graveyard of humanity, but the seedbed of a transformed humanity, if we cannot envisage Earth evolution differently than the natural scientists of today who predict that life on Earth will one day become extinct, then all our conceptions of Christ are in vain. They are in vain despite that. For even if we believe that Christ has brought new life to Earth, it is difficult for us to imagine that matter can be so spiritualized that we can envisage it as capable of being transmuted from its present earthly condition to its future condition. We have need of far more powerful ideas in order to be able to conceive of the Earth's metamorphosis to the Jupiter condition. This Jupiter condition is killing me, right? This is the conception of king, right? Jupiter was the king, and so this is the conception of the king. But were you going to turn us to a gaseous planet? Is that the conception? Now, I understand they didn't have the understanding that we do, right? Our astronomy is far advanced from what it was even in the 1970s. This was prior to rockets, right? This was just in the time of we discovered biplanes. And so, yes, there are things that need to happen spiritually here on earth in order to achieve perfection. I doubt we ever get there. I don't even think that's really the goal. But we are never going to transform into a Jupiter condition. Jupiter is a lifeless planet as far as we know today. Right? There can be some conceptions of life that we don't necessarily understand or have discovered, but for the most part, life as we know it, like what we define life as, intelligent life, is not there. I said recently in a public lecture that natural science thinks, or rather calculates, that if the forces of nature as they exist today were to persist for millions of years, then a condition would arise according to Dewar, I mentioned in Lecture 3, his lecture before the Royal Institute, when, if the walls of a room were painted with albumin, it would be possible to read the newspaper in its phosphorescent light. I spoke of the scientists who declared that in the distant future milk would be solid and emit a blue light and so on. That is some wild speculations. These ideas are the inevitable consequence of nebulous thinking that is unable to come to terms with reality. Such calculations are equivalent to deducing from the modifications in the human stomach over a period of 4 or 5 years what its condition would be after 250 years. We've already talked about the logical inconsistencies in the arguments that he is arguing against. I am able to arrive at this conclusion by extending my calculations over a large number of years. The scientist calculates what will be the condition of the Earth a million years hence. On the same principle, I can calculate the condition of the human stomach after 250 years. Only by that time, the man will be dead. Just as the geologists calculate the condition of the Earth millions of years ago, so too, on the same principle, one could calculate by showing the modifications in a child's stomach over a period of a week or a fortnight, the condition of the same stomach 250 years ago. But of course, the child would not have been alive at that time. Concepts cannot provide a total picture of reality. Scientific concepts are valid for the period of time between 6000 and 7000 BC and AD 6000 and 7000, but not beyond that time. Why? Why? Because you don't agree with it, right? The world was created in 7 days, 6,000 years ago. So, of course, we can only go back that far. Anything farther than that is merely testing the realm. The Earth is older than 6,000 years. That is a certified fact. There is no way to get around that. The Earth is not a flat plane. It is not covered in a dome over the top of a flat plane. Those are simply not truths. This is inserting your predetermined outcome upon the hypothesis. That's not how science is supposed to work, right? You formulate a hypothesis and then you attempt to disprove it, right? You try everything within your power to prove that you are wrong. And if you're not, then you give it to someone else and have them try to prove that you are wrong. That's the process of science. It is not, I think this thing, let me take these results that reinforce what I think and promulgate those as though they are absolute truth. This is a logical inconsistency, what he's talking about here, right? You can't possibly look at the way that conditions have changed and the time that we have been measuring them and then extrapolate backwards in time how changes might have been wrought. That's not true. You can do that. Now, this stomach thing, that's stupid. Like, that is stupid. I wish I could tell the man to his face, that is a stupid argument. How did you possibly put that, not in one lecture, but in 3 so far? How did you possibly think that it was a good idea to argue that because the human body lives for less than 100 years on average, that it was impossible to extrapolate things that weren't even relevant to anything, right? This is a useless argument, making no point and completely outside the consistency of logical determination. I don't use stupid often. Like I'm getting more often using it, but it's not something that I freely throw around. There are very few arguments that don't have at least a little bit of validity to them, but this is completely outside of the realm of useful in the slightest. We must think of the evolution of man in terms of a totally different timescale, and the Christ being must occupy a central place in future evolution. And again, there is some of that logical inconsistency and self-insertion. I said, therefore, on a previous occasion that we must distinguish between what the Middle Ages called mystical marriage and what Christian Rosenkreuz called chemical marriage. Mystical marriage is simply an inner experience. And many theosophists used to say, and perhaps still say, if one looks within, if one withdraws into oneself and becomes united with the divine, be it. This was depicted in such roseate hues that after an hour's lecture, the members emerged with the firm conviction that if they took firm control of their inner life, if they practiced self-discipline, they would experience the first intimations of the divine within. That is true. That will happen. Not with a single practice, right? not after an hour's lecture, right? But if you take firm control of your inner life, if you practice self-discipline, you will experience the first intimations of the divine within. I can guarantee you that. Prayer, fasting, and meditation will make that happen. I can guarantee you that. But you have to divorce yourself from the knowledge that you think you already know. You have to open yourself up to a new experience. You have to understand that there are things that you don't understand. There are a lot of things in science that I don't really get, right? We're not going to dive into specific examples, but there are a lot of them. I spend my time trying to understand those. I watch videos when I'm not doing this, right? I'm building my game. I've got scientific lectures on over here, or the news, or something relevant to learning something new. That's what I watch on this screen while I am building my game on this screen. That's after I'm done with what we're doing here, where I am trying to learn things. And so you can do things, but you have to divorce yourself from thinking that you know everything. Like, I don't even claim that I know everything. I claim that I have a path, that I do know something more. But that doesn't mean I have all the answers. I do have some of them. I do have the fact that if you practice self-discipline, you pray, fast, and meditate, that you are earnestly seeking, God will reveal to you personally the things of which I speak. I believe that wholeheartedly because it has happened to me. The chemical marriage of Christian Rosencreutz imagines forces to be active in man which embrace the whole man, which so transform his being that when he is purified from the dross of the physical body, he is translated to the Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan conditions. The aim of Manichaeism was the conquest of evil and of matter by thought. Julian was brought face to face with the deeper implications of the problem of evil and the relation of Jesus Christ to the problem. Now, I have not studied Manichaeism. I do not know the doctrines. I don't know the things that are involved in it, so I'm not speaking a whole lot on that. I don't know, therefore I am not talking. I only try to talk about the things I do know, and if I am speculating, I try to make it clear I am speculating. I do know that you can have a deeper experience. I don't know what Manichaeism was all about, other than what we have briefly talked about in here through what this guy, who is obviously biased against, is telling us. Julian was brought face to face with deeper implications of the problem of evil and the relation to Christ Jesus to this problem. He hoped to find an answer through initiation into the Persian mysteries and to return to Europe with a solution. But unfortunately, he fell by an assassin's hand during the Persian campaign. I wonder if that was coincidence. I wonder if that was coincidental, that he went to try to disprove what was happening in the control system, and then he was just randomly assassinated. Again, I don't know this guy's history, but I wonder. It's not a hard leap to make, right? It can be proved historically that this was the work of an adherent of Constantine. Thus we see that in the course of history, the attempt to establish the principle of continuity was fraught with tragedy, and that in the case of Julian, it led to a blind alley. No, that is not what that says. That is not what that says. That is not what that says. What that says is that he was stopped from bringing it back to Europe. That's what that says. That doesn't say anything about it being a blind alley. It doesn't say that he didn't learn it. It says that he went to Persia and somebody killed him because he was intending to bring knowledge back to Europe, which would directly contradict Constantine. I wonder if it was related. In the following years, the Augustinian principle triumphed. Ideas that in any way echoed Manichaeism were forbidden. An example, the inclusion of material ideas in spiritual thinking. The West, therefore, was driven into an abstract mode of thinking, and in the course of time, this mode of thinking permeated the whole of Western Europe. Only a few of the foremost minds rebelled against this tendency, and one of the most celebrated of these was Goethe. His whole cast of mind was opposed to abstract theorizing, and one of those who succumbed to it most was Kant. Take, for example, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. I know that what I am about to say is heretical, and let us look at the main propositions. If you reverse each of these propositions, you will arrive at the truth. And the same applies particularly to his theory of space and time. You can equally well reverse every proposition, and you will then arrive at conclusions that are valid for the spiritual world. You can gather from this why some people have a professional interest in misrepresenting Goethe, the great opponent of Kant. As I showed in the case of Haller, who wrote, "No created spirit can penetrate into the inner recesses of nature," a complete distortion of Goethe's conception of nature. I'm trying to just break up where it is in quotations with something different. And so whatever comes out is what's going to come out. If you get offended by that, this is definitely not the right spot for you. If we bear this point of view in mind, we can appreciate at its true worth Julian's essay, which was directed against Pauline Christianity. Let's look at note 2, because I as well am definitely against Pauline Christianity. Note 2. That is not the same. Is there a different note 2? Let's see if there's a different note 2 that pops out right here. Bingo, bango, bongo, boy. Let's see what's up. Nope, that is the same one. We've read that already, so I don't know how that's particularly relevant. It is a remarkable document, not so much for its contents, but for its similarity to certain writings of the 19th century. This may seem paradoxical, but the facts are as follows. Julian's polemic against Christianity musters every kind of argument against Christianity, against the historical Jesus and certain Christian documents, with passionate sincerity. And when we compare these arguments with the objections raised by the liberal theology of the 19th century, note 3, let's go ahead and read it. Note 3 is liberal theology. The chief representatives of liberal Protestant theology in the 19th century were Bayer, founder of the Tübingen School of New Testament Research, and Ritschl, 1822-89, who rejected metaphysics and mysticism and developed an objective and scientific method of research. The great exponent of the Ritschl school was A. von Harnack, 1851-1930, whose History of Dogma and What is Christianity are regarded as monuments of liberal historiography. Harnack eschewed metaphysical speculation, perfected the scientific historical method, and emphasized the need for source study and faithful representation of facts. The gospel about Jesus does not belong to the gospel preached by Jesus, says Harnack. Radical historical research led to Bultmann's demythologization, the attempt to liberate the Church's teachings from the mythological language in which it is expressed. Myths, he said, need reinterpretation in terms of modern consciousness. The other burning questions of the 19th century was, is the gospel true, and how can we know that it is true? Drews, Jensen, and Kauthoff in Germany, J.M. Robinson, W.B. Smith, and T.A. Jackson in England claimed that the Christ figure was a copy of the cult god of pagan beliefs under another name, and that is most likely a true thing. Not necessarily that he walked, but most of the acts can probably be attributed to theft. All right, let's go back. The liberal theology of the 19th century and the later theology of the adherents of Drews against the historicity of Christ. When we consider the whole field of literature of the 18th and 19th centuries, which reveals most careful, painstaking, and thorough philological investigation, there are endless repetitions, so that one has to consult whole libraries. We find that we can piece together certain guiding principles. The leading critics began to undertake a comparative study of the Gospels and found many discrepancies in the texts. But all of these critical methods were already anticipated by Julian. The 19th century criticism offered nothing new that was not already known to Julian. Julian spoke out of a natural creative gift, whilst the 19th century criticism displayed enormous industry, great erudition, and downright theological sophistry. And once again, I am going to point you to the Unconventional Bible Study, which is where I went through in 161 videos and did many of these things, completely independent of even knowing who Julian was, or any of these other people. I went through, merely read the book aloud, and discovered many of these things for myself. The Gospels are indeed contradictory. They are. The Old Testament is contradictory to itself, often, and even more often within the same chapters, right? Within the same book, but even within the same chapters within that book, right? We have a collection of independent books, that is the Bible, and each one of those books tells a story. And within that story, it is directly contradictory to itself. Many times, like repeatedly. You should definitely check that out if you do not know what I am talking about. Julian, therefore, was engaged in a titanic struggle. He finally attempted, by reviving Manichaeism, to bring about the continuity and the evolution of the pagan mysteries. Bear in mind how the most enlightened mind, such as Goethe, felt an instinctive urge to recapture the spirit of ancient Greece. Imagine what would have happened if Julian's policy had been crowned with success. Sorry, I had to get rid of those hiccups. That he was doomed to fail was a necessity of his time. And we shall not understand the reason for his failure if we belittle his great achievements, if we fail to see him as a titanic figure, fighting for a realistic understanding of the relations between man and the universe. And it is of paramount importance today to recall these great moments in the historical evolution of the West. For we are living in an age from which we shall not emerge with a healthy outlook unless we make a fresh assessment of the aims of Julian the Apostate. It was not possible in his time, herein lies his great tragedy, to reconcile the old principle of initiation with the real essence of Christianity. Today, this has become possible, and we must not fail to translate the possibility into reality if the world and mankind are not to suffer evolutionary decline. People must realize the need for regeneration in all spheres of life, and above all, the crying need to restore communication with the spiritual world. And on this part right here, we are aligned. I do believe that we need a realignment with communication with the spiritual world. That is why I am on this mission. That is why God has given me this vision. He has given me this mission. He has set me out amongst the wild, wild west of the world in order to show that. Right? That is why I am here. So I agree with that. I just disagree with his source. Right? I believe that you can go directly to the source, and he believes that you must have an intermediary to go to the source for you. First of all, we must understand the factors that militate against this necessary regeneration. Today we are afraid of definite, clear-cut ideas which could lead to such an understanding. There is no lack of physical courage today, but we are certainly lacking in intellectual courage. Mankind today is unwilling to face realities, and this is the greatest need of our time. There is a reason, right? There is a reason why most people lack the intellectual courage to explore. It is much easier to go along. When I tell you that I am on a difficult path, it is. Right? There are very few people out there who agree with the things that I do. Some of you are here, right? I am finding more people who agree every single day. And every time YouTube actually releases my videos, many of you show up, right? They released 2 of my videos. They actually let me get over 30 or 40 views, and I have a double-digit increase in subscribers overnight. That happened last night. I went to bed yesterday, and 2 of my videos were at 30. I woke up this morning, and they were both at 200 and something, and I have well over 10% of that joined the crew just from those 2 videos. Most of my videos are restricted, right? People want to hear this because they know it. They know deep in their soul that there is something wrong with the control system, but they can't define it. I am attempting to define it, but that sets me apart and makes me a target. I am fine with that, right? You cannot bring me the smoke that is going to make me back away. I am built for the smoke. And so I am here because I do have the intellectual courage to say these things, despite the fact that there are people that show up all of the time. Well, did you consider that maybe Jesus was divine? Well, yes, I have considered that. As a matter of fact, I have considered the primary point of your contention to my theory. I have considered that. I have dismissed it, but I have considered it. Well, did you consider dispensationalism? Well, yes, I did that too. Nobody can come to me with a new argument that, and I'm not saying nobody can, I'm saying nobody does. Nobody can come to me with a new argument that disproves anything that I'm talking about. They come with the same old arguments. Well, Jesus. Well, no. And I understand that it probably stepped on some toes, but if you were this far along, it wasn't yours. Mankind is unwilling to face realities, and this is the greatest need of our time. For our age is not to end in futility. For if our age is not to end in futility, it must learn to understand the principle of the creative spirit and what it means when it is said that the spirit, when creative, is as powerful a force as the instincts, save that our instincts work in the dark, whilst the creative spirit works in the light of the sun. In example, the spiritual sun. That is what our age must learn to understand, and especially in our own time. Many forces are still arrayed against any understanding of the creative spirit and are actively engaged in suppressing that knowledge. That is again also true. The creative spirit is you creating the world. In large part, that is what you do. Now, the creative commons of humanity is creating the larger scope of the world, but you create your world. You determine where you want to go to work. You may not like that fact, but it is true. If you've been working in a job that has made you miserable for any amount of years, that is a choice that you are continuing to make. There are other options. It can be exceedingly difficult to find them. I understand that. But you are choosing to remain where you are. The creative spirit allows that to happen, right? You have decided that you're going to stay here, and so that happens. But if you decide, you know what, I need something different, and you start speaking aloud, I need something different every single day, then new opportunities will present themselves to you. You have to choose to take those opportunities. But the creative spirit brings those opportunities to you that is helping you to create the life that you want. That is true for every single thing in your life, not just your job. Right? If you are miserable in your relationship, same thing. If you are miserable searching for a relationship, same thing. If you wake up every single day, or even once a week, and you're like, today is going to be a shitty day, then guess what you're going to get? Every single time. But if you wake up and you say, today is going to be a great day, then no matter how much shit you have to wade through, it's not a shitty day. It is amazing. It is mental alchemy, and it does work. That is the creative spirit, actively engaged, not in suppressing that knowledge, but in reinforcing your desires, creating the reality in which you live. The things you speak become true in your life. If you are downplaying your children, they will grow up downplayed. If you are talking smack about your spouse, then they are going to be talked about. You create reality for you. Now, the collective commons, me and you and everybody else, play our part in creating the greater reality. Consciousness in that, right? Understanding that the creative spirit exists and that you can manipulate it. And by manipulation, I do not mean through subterfuge, but by direct interaction. You can manipulate it into creating the existence that you want. The more you are aware of that, the bigger part you play in the Creative Commons. I say all of the time, this is now my timeline. I have taken control of this timeline. I am taking everybody who is not in direct control of their timeline, and I'm assimilating them with me. I'm assuming the responsibility for the timeline. All those Mandela effects, they're mine. That is because of the changes that I am creating in reality. We are barreling towards a different bottleneck now than we were 2 years ago. Thank you, God, for allowing me to do that. Cato's policy was to establish a highly centralized political system. In order to achieve this, he felt it was necessary to exile the adherents of Hellenistic philosophy. They only prayed, he said, and that has a disturbing effect upon the decrees of the authorities. And the celebrated Florentine Machiavelli was also of this opinion and gave high praise to Cato because he proposed to banish those who used the weapon of spiritual knowledge in order to raise objections to state decrees. Machiavelli fully appreciated the fact that in the Roman Empire, any interference with the structure of the social order was on certain occasions punishable by death. Intercourse with the spiritual world was anathema, especially to the Roman Empire and the successor states in Europe. Every effort was therefore made to ensure that the greatest uncertainty should prevail in these matters, and they were hushed up as much as possible. If a conception of the mystery of Golgotha that is both radical and uncompromising gains a firm foothold in the world, then we shall have to modify considerably our mental attitude. This is not to our liking, but it will have to come, and in a way must be found to arrive at a real understanding of the nature of Christ. In our next lecture, I propose to discuss how we can directly experience the being and nature of Christ today. We shall see this whole question in wider perspective through a study of two contrasting figures. Constantine, who inaugurated the exoteric side of Western culture, and Julian the Apostate, who, when the times were out of joint for him, attempted to take up the struggle against the exoteric side of Western evolution. It is a curious phenomenon that if anyone with a slight knowledge, I do not mean of occult facts, but with a real knowledge of these occult facts that can still be found in ancient writings, makes a study of Christian dogma, if, for example, we inquire into the origin of the Mass, or if ritual and dogma are studied in the light of this occult knowledge derived from ancient writings, we discover most extraordinary things. I have recently had both the pleasure and not necessarily the pleasure to attend a funeral. My papa died recently, and he was a Catholic, so I got to witness for the first time a Catholic burial. Now, first time is a stretch because my Uncle James died back when I was a teenager, and I attended that funeral, but I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't even pay attention for the most part. But as an adult, this was the first Catholic Mass that I went to. And it was here that I understood for the very first time exactly what a Mass is. I never knew that it was a Mass intention. Did you know that? Did you know that that's what it's actually called? The Catholic Mass is actually the Catholic Mass intention. It is the setting of intention to the dogma. It is something that is directing the energies towards a certain thing. Kind of makes you wonder. What did they know? What did they not want you to know? It is important to look at the iconography that is attendant in a church. I got to see that again firsthand for the first real time in my life. And it is definitely something. If you are, like the particular church I was in, they had a raised, like it was a great circular room, and they had a wing over here and a wing over there and a wing in the front. And then the back was restricted for the priests. But this circular area had a shelf built around the top. And on this shelf were various icons. And all of those icons are directly contradictory to the things that Jesus taught. And that is an interesting thing. The procedures by which they do things directly contradictory to what Jesus taught. Like, there's not a whole lot in the Catholic faith that is directly related to Jesus at all. They profess a faith, I give them that, but they don't really believe it. And the Mass intention is one of those things that it's a ritual prayer, right? It is the harvesting of these energies of these people towards a particular thing. And that's exactly what it was designed to be, the harvesting of these energies. That was an interesting thing for me to learn. What lies behind these dogmas and cult acts that are the Mass? Not I alone, but countless authors who have studied these questions from this standpoint, have come to the conclusion that in ritual and dogma a large residuum of paganism has been preserved or has survived, so that an attempt was made, for example, by the French writer Droc, and we will pop out note 4. Droc, 1791 to 1865, studied at various Talmudic schools and was converted to Christianity in 1823. He went to Rome and was appointed librarian of propaganda. That's excellent. Who was an authority on Hebraism to demonstrate that the dogma and ritual of the Catholic Church were simply a revival of paganism. And others attempted to show that certain people were at pains to conceal from the faithful the fact that the dogmas and ritual of the church were imbued with paganism. That is exactly my experience in my first visit to the Catholic Mass intention. Now, it would have been a strange phenomenon if paganism, in particular, had survived quite unconsciously. In that event, we might ask, in what way would the survival of paganism have contributed to the survival of the Roman Empire? And what would have been the position of Julian the Apostate? If many recent writers are right in saying that the Catholic sacrifice of the Mass, for example, is in essence a pagan sacrifice, and that Julian had been at great pains to preserve and perpetuate the ancient pagan rites, then to some extent Julian has achieved his aim after all. A study of these two contrasting figures, Constantine and Julian, raises countless problems of the highest importance, thorny problems, as Nietzsche calls them, problems which are fraught with fateful consequences for us today and which, without question, will become the central problems of our time. I propose to return to these problems in my next lecture, which we will be doing soon. And so ends lecture 7, right? I think we're on 7. And once again, there was a lot of history here that I can't directly contradict, right? Or even confirm. I don't know enough about Julian the Apostate to be able to speak intelligently upon anything which he believes. But from what we have seen proposed here in this lecture, Julian was onto something much more than the people that were opposed to him. The control system was designed, apparently, to directly remove you from the interaction with spirit. Probably so that we could wind up where we are today, where people are arguing about whether or not it's okay to kill children, or whether or not there's a lot of different problems. We're not going to get into all of that. I might get banned. But the control systems are in direct opposition to some things, and some things that are directly opposite, right? They are in opposition in large part to scientific endeavors, right? They believe that 6,000 years ago the world was formed. And this is not all, so don't get it twisted. They believe that the world is flat. They believe in a myriad of things that are provably untrue. But also, they stand in opposition to the spiritual things. They place in between you and source an intermediary so that you can turn to the intermediary for intervention. Well, you don't need to. You can turn directly to source. And that's what I'm dragging from Julian. That's what he was trying to do. It has been shown repeatedly in here that he was trying to separate the paganism of the Christian cult from the greater mysteries. We do not have accurate representation of the greater mysteries. I have not discovered anywhere yet that has the initiation rituals recorded, that has actual, like, Pythagorean cult things, or the Eleusinian cult doctrines. Like, those things are just missing from history. Largely because of the Catholic Church. Now, they probably exist underneath the Catholic Church. I don't believe that the Great Fire in Alexandria did exactly what we are told it did. I believe that there were a large volume of knowledge taken and hidden away from humanity. But the people who created the mass intention, they know these things. They study these things. They understand these things. They just reserve them for themselves. And then they inject an intermediary between you and these things. My goal is to rip away that control system. Not necessarily disband it, but to give to those who are genuinely seeking knowledge the knowledge that they are genuinely seeking. There is a spiritual path outside of the control systems. There is, through direct revelation, things that you can learn that are directly contradictory to the things that are in these books. The Bible study, we talk about that a good bit, that there are some things that are true and some things that are not true, and that some of the seeds that are contained within that book are true. Despite the best efforts of man, the truth of God shows through. The King James Version did a lot to harm mankind. The Inquisition did a lot to harm mankind. I believe that the spiritual path is going to come back. I do. I believe that I am going to play a part in that. I don't want to call it a key role or anything like that. I'm not the only one doing this, right? I am probably the loudest about it, the most committed to it. Sorry. Maybe there's not. Maybe I'm being interrupted for a reason. But it is my understanding there are at least a couple of other people who are attempting to do the same thing that I am doing. Maybe not in the same manner, maybe not with the same terminology, but they are trying to show the hypocrisy built into the control systems. I'm not even really about that, right? It's there. We did that. That was the Bible study. What I am more concerned with these days is showing you that you can turn directly to God. That you can open up that sun, that spiritual sun, not the one that's coming up in the east and setting in the west, but the one that is always there right in front of you. The one that springs to life when you have the dedication to do the prayer, fasting, and meditation. That allows you to take control of your timeline in the way that I have taken control of everybody else's. I really believe that we are on a path of enlightenment. That eventually we will get there, but it may be on the other side of the bottleneck. I am hoping to put out enough seeds out in the wild world that when the bottleneck happens, and it will happen, there is a determined thing, that when the bottleneck happens, there are enough people on the other side that we can do this without the control systems in place. That's my endeavor for the next 30 years. That is what I'm going to be doing for the next 30 years. Pulling back the veil, tearing it apart, ripping it to shreds, and disintegrating all of the pieces. I want to take the veil completely away from as many people as I possibly can. It's why we have the Infinite Integrations playlist. It's why we have the Ancient Lore playlist. It's why we go through all of these documents and talk about them. The Esoterica playlist, the Unconventional Bible Study playlist. All of these are pointed towards ripping that veil away. You can go directly to God. That is an indisputable, immutable fact. That is something I stand on with all 10 toes and push into with my entire chest. You don't need me. You need to seek God. You don't need Jesus. You need to seek God. You don't need Moses. You need to seek God. You don't need any book. You need to turn your face. You need to pray, fast, and meditate, and that will lead you where you need to go. I can give you instructions. I am endeavoring to do so. But you have to do the work. I cannot do it for you. And that's where I'm going to wrap this one up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat complicated topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those beliefs. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I am here to rip away the veil, and that is going to be a somewhat painful process for a lot of people. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree. If you remain respectful, I let it stay up. And if you've got something like this that you want to see me talk about, drop it in the comments. I am making a list. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I am not a communist and I do not manifest money. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitch Take. Peace.